And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on Saturday, August 23rd, 2025. And what we got going on is we've had an atmospheric river frontal system push inland along the west coast as of this Saturday morning. And moisture is spreading inland across the interior. Moderate to locally heavy rains will continue through the weekend. Some locations here, especially along the Yukon Valley, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range could pick up easily 2-3 inches of rainfall with locally higher amounts where the terrain would enhance it. And as we get into Sunday morning, we find IFR conditions along areas of the west coast, Norton Sound, into the southwest interior. Again, a combination of rain, low cloudiness, and fog. Certainly out over the Bering, this push of mild air has resulted in low stratus and fog, so IFR is extensive, extending out through the Aleutians. Pockets of IFR along the middle Yukon and heading eastward into the higher terrain north of Fairbanks, and also along areas especially there, the central Brooks Range. And then we have some IFR conditions lurking off of the Panhandle coast out over the eastern portion of the Gulf. But VFR conditions will rule across much of south central in through the Panhandle. Very warm temperatures. Any locations that get sun here in south central and certainly down here through the Panhandle will have temperatures above 70. In fact, a few spots are going to hit 80. There are heat advisories for the southern part of the Panhandle for this Saturday, continuing for Hyder into Sunday. Could be 80 degrees again there. Sunday afternoon, we find a stalled out frontal boundary just north of the Alaska Range. That's where the moisture streams northeastward, so we find an area of MVFR, and there'll be areas of rain, some lower ceilings, and visibility, and then extensive IFR conditions from the lower Yukon coast and Kuskokwim, Bristol Bay, southwestward through the Pribilofs and across the Aleutian chain. Still VFR conditions expected around Anchorage, Kenai Peninsula, Copper River Basin, Upper Tanana Valley, and then throughout the Panhandle. On Monday, what's going to happen is another low is going to quickly race northeastward. That'll be the case later Sunday, but the low itself will be arriving just near and south of Nome on Monday afternoon. So this is going to be another round of moisture pushing into the southwest coast and then in the interior along and especially north of the Alaska Range, coming up the lower half of the Yukon and Kuskokwim River basins. There will be low cloudiness, fog, and periods of steadier rain. And some of that moisture could creep up along the western Gulf Coast, eastern Kenai, Prince William Sound, IFR conditions there, and certainly up along the Alaska Range for Monday morning. And then on Monday afternoon, we find widespread IFR conditions across the western mainland and through the northwest, from Utqiagvik down through the Lisburn Peninsula, western Brooks Range and North Slope, Seward Peninsula, and the lower portion of the Yukon Valley. We find ridge of high pressure kind of reestablishing itself. So that means sunshine and very warm for the Panhandle up into the southeast mainland. And looking at what we can expect for pass conditions, Anaktuvik Pass IFR on Sunday morning, giving way to VFR conditions by afternoon. Adigan IFR giving way to maybe more MVFR conditions Sunday afternoon. And then Lake Clark and Merrill, generally MVFR conditions, though it will be VFR east of the past entrances. And as you go further west beyond the west entrance, IFR you're going to run into, because that's across the interior there, a fair amount of rain and lower cloudiness and some fog. Rainy Pass, MVFR on Sunday. Windy Pass, also MVFR. Isabel may start out with MVFR conditions, improving to VFR, and then Mentasta Pass on south into the Copper River Basin and all the way down to Portage. We'll see VFR conditions on Sunday, and then, of course, in through the Panhandle with that ridge of high pressure in place. Chilkoot and Whites should see VFR conditions throughout Sunday. So on the map here that shows where the surface freezing line is up, way up into the kind of Chukchi Sea Arctic Ocean interface, and then the Beaufort Sea. And we find cooler temperatures aloft. This is where a front is stalled out down through this region. Surface front is here. The front a little aloft is a little further north. But we can see temperatures cooling as you go north, but warming as you head south and west. The southern mainland has freezing levels around 12,000 feet. If you get further back toward the eastern central Aleutians, there southward, freezing levels are at or above 14,000 feet. And with this stream of moisture, this atmospheric river that has tropical moisture from the Pacific Ocean, heading northeastward, the stream is riding along and north of the frontal boundary. So where there are areas of thicker clouds that are producing some moderate to even at times locally heavier rainfall, with the intrusion of that warm, moist air feeding the precipitation as well as raising those freezing levels aloft, we find down here toward the central Aleutians above 16,000 feet, above 14,000 feet along Kuskokwim, western Bristol Bay, and as we come inland into the southwest interior, going up the lower Yukon and the Kuskokwim rivers, above 12,000 feet, and then around the middle upper Yukon Valley toward Fairbanks, Yukon Flats, where there are thicker clouds and areas of rain, above 10,000 feet the freezing level. Then for Sunday, here's the jet stream pattern. We have this broad belt of southwest flow from the North Pacific across the Aleutians and Bering Sea coming into the west coast, centered on Norton Sound, and then through the interior along and north of the Yukon River up through the eastern half of the Brooks Range. And you get up toward the Mackenzie River entrance or mouth there, and we're looking at a jet max at 30,000 feet of 120 knots. Bringing it down to 700 millibars or 9,000 feet, a belt of stronger winds 50 to 65 knots. Central, east central interior riding right along the Yukon River. And then back to the west, that southwesterly flow continues all the way down in through and past the Aleutian chain. And here comes the next impulse or low pressure Sunday afternoon just southwest of the western central Aleutians. That's that next low that's going to be racing northeastward and approaching Nome on Monday afternoon. So here we are at 3,000 feet on Sunday, and we find winds along the Yukon, middle Yukon River and the north side of the Alaska Range southwesterly about 35 knots, 35 to 40 knots. Across the southwest interior into Bristol Bay, Cape Newingham, winds there 40, 45 knots, and extending southwestward to another little wind max of 45 to 60 knots approaching the central Aleutians with that next low. So turbulence Sunday will extend a broad belt along and just north of the frontal boundary from the Yukon Flats, especially higher terrain around Fairbanks, along the north side of the Alaska Range, and then extending southwestward all the way down through Kuskokwim Bay. There could be surface, the turbulence there, moderate surface to 4,000 feet with some low-level wind shear, and then pulling back through the Pribilovs and the central Aleutian. We also find widespread moderate turbulence, surface to 3,000 feet on Sunday.